My guest today is Susan Shor Fehmi. She's been a practicing psychotherapist for 40 years, and for the last 20 years she's been the director of the Princeton Biofeedback Centre in New Jersey, where along with her husband, Dr Les Fehmi, who originally developed the technique, she trains people in something called open focus attention training, which is a meditation technique, but really it's a way of changing how you pay attention. So right now you're probably narrowly focused on this video, you're not really aware of the peripherals around in the room around you, and I'm narrowly focused on the camera, I'm not really aware of the peripherals in the room around me. And according to Dr. Fehmi, most of us are almost like addicted to this kind of narrow focus. And we're also, it's an objective focus, so I'm not like identified with the object. I'm an outsider looking at the object and my focus is very narrow. And in this narrow objective focus that we are almost like addicted to, and as a society we almost like worship, and even our leisure time, we're spending time watching TV or reading books, our focus is completely narrow. It's having an effect on the body because the way you're paying attention, according to the open focus theory, the way you're paying attention changes your nervous system, changes the tension in your muscles, changes the brainwave activity. And so Dr. Fehmi's technique is based in science, it's based in biofeedback and using EEGs to regulate brainwave activity. And it's really interesting, the kind of I guess meditation suggestions are really key in this technique, and we talk about that at length, me and Susan, in this video. It's really interesting stuff. If you want to try out some of the techniques, Susan very kindly agreed to lead me in an open focus technique, and the video, I'll leave a link at the end of this video for that video. If you enjoy this video, please do give it a like, and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you are interested in videos about meditation and breathwork. All right, enjoy. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for asking.
I guess we can start with a deceptively simple question. I mean,
Sure.
what is open focus?
Open focus is an attention training technique. It's based on the fact that the way we pay attention, not to what we pay attention, but the way we pay attention orchestrates brainwave activity. And as everybody knows, brainwave activity is a reflection of the nervous system, the central nervous system. And that central nervous system runs all the peripheral systems like the vascular, the endocrine, the muscular system. So in effect, by just changing how you pay attention, you have this cascade effect of changing brain waves, changing the nervous system, changing the peripheral systems, and thus changing your experience of life. So it's a very simple process of changing your attention from one that tends to be narrow and objective to one that becomes more inclusive and immersed.
So open focus is the technique, right? Is that, I'm getting that right? The open focus
Yes.
is the actual technique of doing that. And so how does one go about doing that?
Well, in simple exercises that involve opening up to space, space is a big factor in the work that we do. And it may seem like an odd thing, but until I mentioned it, anybody listening to this has probably not even thought about space. But there's more space in this room than there are in your room than there are objects. What happens when we open up to space, our attention has to broaden because space is everywhere and runs through things. And in physics, we know that even the atom is mostly space. So by simply attending to space, an attention shift changes and opens up. And when we're in this diffuse attentional space through the awareness of space, that's when the brainwaves start to shift. And the next thing you do, once you're in this expanded state, then you merge with your experience. That the more you are into what you're doing, like if you're eating chocolate and you're really becoming the chocolate, is different than saying, Belgium chocolate. So learning how to immerse and diffuse through the awareness of space has that cascade effect. But what I love about this whole process is it may reflect other great traditions of meditation and relaxation training, but Les Fehmi got it out of observing brainwaves. He was very intent on seeing what could change his brainwaves as he was measuring them and discovering all these things and that came out of that observation. So the fact that science supports all the mystical stuff we know and all the relaxation stuff we know seems very cool to me, that we have another verification through brainwaves.
And so what are the effects on brainwaves? If I was to start focusing on the space around me, as you're suggesting, and almost become aware of that as an object,
Yes.
what would happen to my brainwaves at that point?
Well, brainwaves, when we're in our everyday life, which is more narrow focused and kind of removed, brainwaves are faster and more irregular. They're in the beta range. And there's nothing wrong with any of these brainwave states. We need them all. But we spend so much time in this narrow objective attention with these fast, irregular brainwaves, which activate the part of the nervous system that creates fight or flight, that just by learning to attend in the way I said, brainwaves start to slow down. They move out of beta into alpha. And what we specialize in is synchrony training. So that you can not only have a frequency like alpha, which is a relaxed alert state, but when the brainwaves all over the head are producing synchronous activity, peaking and troughing at the same time, that's when the central nervous system or the autonomic nervous system comes into balance and all those nice things happen. So there's what's cool with neurofeedback is you can observe these things. You don't have to believe me. You can get on a piece of equipment and say, okay, let's see, is what she's saying true?
Okay, so with the brainwaves slowing from beta to alpha, and then coming into synchrony, and that happening across the brain, and that happens just from me becoming aware of space. Is that what you're saying?
And immersing yourself in space.
So how? I guess the immersing sounds more abstract. How do I go
Yes,
from
it does. Well, right now, if you were going to put your hands on your lap and feel the presence of your fingers, let's say the thumb and the forefinger, we know there are more cells in the sensory motor strip devoted to these two fingers than there are for your whole back. So we're very able to feel these two fingers. If you were to feel these two fingers filled with space and imagine feeling the space between them, you would go a long way to reversing that tendency to be narrow and objective. And the more you feel into space, the more you make space a palpable feeling. That's immersion. So immersion is what we do when if we're at a concert and we're sort of hanging back and objectifying this string section or the tempo of the music. That's a very narrow objective attention. But when we start to become immersed in the music, that's immersion. When we taste that chocolate and become the chocolate, when we're hugging somebody we love, you don't want to hug your child this way. You want to come and embrace the child. So we're doing it naturally. We do it with good feelings, Something good happens and we say, oh, come and get me, feel it more. And it goes away pretty fast. With bad feelings, we push it away. So this whole reminder to be fully present in all these sense modes, particularly feeling in the beginning, because we neglect our feelings, is something that you just learn. And by opening up to space, since space helps you open up, there's a tendency as you open to immerse. I know I talk about them like they're two separate things because language is sequential. But if you were to open up to space, the more you feel space inside and outside, the more you naturally move into it and feel it more palpably. So you're naturally immersing.
So there's almost like a loss of a sense of self then, if I'm losing that object relationship.
Yes, yes. The separation of the self from the object starts to merge together. But what I love about it, I mean, this is a fairly esoteric conversation. I teach it to kids all the time. You know, I say, pretend you're like a balloon floating in space and surrounded by space, and you see their EEG changing. And all this talk is not going to get you anywhere. I mean, the process is so much more simple than that.
How did this come about? How did Dr. Fehmi discover this?
Well, this is my favorite part. He was, after he got his PhD at UCLA, he went into a postdoc training program where he was measuring the speed with which monkeys can see an object and then have it register in the brain. And he discovered that the milliseconds it took for the monkey brain to absorb what it was seeing was too fast for the pattern, a visual pattern, to be to run up the nervous system in a temporal or sequential way. It had to happen all at once, simultaneously, because there just wasn't enough time for a sequential pattern. That led him to say, well, what is it about synchrony? Where else in the nervous system is synchrony part of information processing? And he remembered that alpha waves have the properties of more synchrony than any other brain waves, quite naturally. And he thought, and he had found the work of Dr. Joe Camilla, who was then a professor at University of California, who had made a big splash showing that people can recognize when they're producing alpha wave activity. Not 100% of the people, but a good portion, which led Les to say, if one can know what kind of brainwaves they're producing, maybe you can train your brain to produce more. So he built an equipment. He took an EEG and made it into a feedback device and started training himself because he figured he'd be pretty good at it. He knew Zen meditation, he knew relaxation techniques, and he sat on that equipment. And we have a graph of it that we show in our workshops. And for 12 two-hour sessions, he couldn't increase his alpha to any degree. And it surprised him. And it threw him off because he was hoping this would be the story of his life, that he was going to show that brainwaves could be trained, and he couldn't do it. And he felt very despondent because he had planned on this being his work. Fortunately, he was still hooked up to the equipment, and he showed that at the moment of giving up, even though he was despondent, his alpha went up sizably. Well, he understood immediately how to do with letting go. And interestingly, it didn't have to be a good feeling. He was feeling crummy, but he just sort of surrendered to it, and all of that alpha happened. So he knew it had to do with letting go. And then by that time, he had moved across the United States to become a college professor at State University of New York at Stony Brook. And he wanted to see if he was unusual or if this was typical of other people. So he set up a lab. This was in the early 70s when consciousness raising and rebellion was rampant in the universities. People were lined up around the block to ride Fehmi's machine. And he set all the subjects up with the same thing. He would expose them to relaxation techniques, to beautiful music, to pretty smells, to guided imagery. And their subject after subject just did not have an increase in alpha. And then he, by luck, came across an inventory of 20 questions that was being used as a hypnotic induction technique. And 2 out of the 20 questions, when asked of every subject that he saw, when nothing else worked, these 2 questions dramatically increased their alpha. What are the 2 questions? Can you imagine the space between your eyes? Can you imagine the space between your ears? What's so special about that? Why would those two questions produce such a shift in alpha activity? And we now understand that one of it is the phrase, can you imagine? Can you imagine encourages you to be effortless. You don't imagine like this, you imagine like this. So it encourages effortlessness, which is a big property of alpha. And feeling the space between your eyes, the space between your ears. We neglect feeling. We're lookers and seers for the most part, and we're not in our body feeling unless we're doing something physical or we're in pain. So just bringing in feeling can be very helpful. But the third thing was space. And the more he introduced space as a quality of the experience, the more alpha was produced. Well, what happens when you're experiencing space? Why is space so important? And here's where I think one of his great contributions is that, as I said before, you can't grasp space. In order to take in space, you have to open up, because space is everywhere and runs through everything. Well, what opens up? Who opens up? And there is a behavior called how you pay attention, not to what you pay attention, but how. And what happens is the more you open up to space, the more the alpha changes. And the more you feel into that space, the more palpable space becomes. The more you surrender to it, the more alpha increases. Well, at that time, he had only been measuring alpha at the back of the head, where we know in the occipital lobe, there's more natural alpha activity. But he spent the summer with a buddy in a space lab in California. And they talked about, wouldn't it be cool if they could convert the equipment to one that measured all over the head, getting all the lobes of the brain and measure not only for alpha, but for synchrony. And they found the same things. So open focus came out of the understanding that gradually opening people up to space and then having them immersed into experience, particularly negative experience, that alpha synchrony increases. As I said, with happy feelings, we open up to it immediately. With unhappy feelings, we try to narrow focus away from it. And that does nothing for us. We keep it in place. But as soon as we merge, like with his despair on not being able to produce alpha, or if we have a headache, immersing ourselves in the headache while we're in space. Or for me, the big one is anxiety. I have a lot of anxiety, so I use it constantly for anxiety I feel in my throat or esophagus or solar plexus. So it all came out of that, and they're very simple exercises.
Yeah, I love that story where he gave up and then he started generating the brainwaves he was looking for.
And gave up in a bad feeling. I mean, we have the idea that alpha is always something beautiful. It isn't. It's attention that shifts, not the subject of the attention.
Yeah. And so with the generation of alpha, I mean, there's obviously that idea that as the brainwaves are slowing from beta to alpha, then we're feeling more relaxed. Are there any other benefits to alpha or the actual synchrony of those waves?
Yeah, we think of relaxation as a side effect because we use it a lot with athletes and performers. And obviously, you don't want to be too relaxed. We think of it as a normalization of the autonomic nervous system. You know, the autonomic nervous system has sympathetic arousal, which is fight, flight, or freeze, and parasympathetic, which is the relaxation response. And most of us, because we live in a society which rewards narrow objective attention, we're in sympathetic over arousal most of the time. So by doing open focus, you bring down that arousal level, you bring up the parasympathetic, and then you have a nice flow. You want to run across the street to avoid a car and have sympathetic arousal, but you want to get to the other side and get some parasympathetic. But most of us are stuck narrow objective attention, sympathetic over arousal, muscle tension, blood flow distortions, endocrine system, adrenaline and cortisol. Simply by opening up to space, everything changes, including breathing. I know that you're very interested in breathing, and a lot of our colleagues are too. And one of the fastest ways to bring about coherent breathing and bring about the kind of breathing that is helpful is to open your focus.
Yeah.
Oh, so how are you saying this is interesting? What can you benefit from it? I think that what the greatest benefit is that you move into the flow. You know, when you're doing something and you're doing it so well and it feels like it's just happening, as opposed to when you're plodding through, it's that kind of state. That's why athletes and performers use it a lot, because they know that you have to become the thing you're doing. I think Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book on the flow experience. He's talking about that state, and that's the alpha synchrony state.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because I know just from the books I've read on yoga nidra, there's a lot of focus on like the theta state at the moment, like that even lower just before you sleep state, and the suggestibility that can happen there, and how you can kind of reprogram the brain. Is alpha similar to that, or is one better than the other, or is it just more about flexibility?
Different functions. I mean, there's a lot of work in the theta state, which some people say is maybe where the unconscious resides. I don't know, but I know the work that some therapists are doing with theta state, that when they get you producing more theta, they then start talking about the subjects of psychotherapy, or there's a natural, it's the same state that you experience when you're falling asleep and you have these bizarre images. That's theta has it's called hypnagogic imagery, and same coming out of sleep. So it's a state of creativity and relaxation. Alpha is a functional state. You can be an alpha when you're doing your best work. So it's a different program.
Okay. And you mentioned psychotherapy there, and you are yourself a practicing psychotherapist. And I know from reading The Open Focus Brain, because it talks at the end there about how you've managed to integrate some of these practices. And I wonder, would you mind talking a little bit about that? How has open focus helped?
Yeah, I mean, I became interested in in synchrony and open focus because I fell in love with Les Fehmi, and I was trying to not my background. My background was psychodynamic psychotherapy. And in psychodynamic psychotherapy, the one of the things you want to encourage is the release of unconscious material into the conscious mind, because once it's out of the unconscious, you can look at it and it evaporates into normal life. It's only when it's in the unconscious that it's driving us in ways that we're not aware of. So a lot of the time spent in therapy is talking about situations that may have caused discomfort and that you've pushed away and pushed into the unconscious. I think it's no accident that Freud, whatever you think of Freud, he was the first one to talk about this. He had people lie on a bed in a darkened room, and he would sit behind the client and he wouldn't say anything. And I think it's because he was inducing an open focus state. And then the unconscious bubbled up, and in free association, people would start revealing to themselves the things that they had buried. So in the beginning, I couldn't find a way to integrate them. I felt that people were coming to me for open focus training and synchrony training for stress-related disorders. I should give them that. And if they came to me for therapy, I could do that. But it became so clear that if you're having a problem with your mother, and this problem is chronic, and it is described the way your psyche has developed and your other relationships, it's you view your mother in a different way when you're in an open focus state. You're just not as reactive. Your parasympathetic activity is increased, your muscles are more relaxed, your blood flow is different, and you begin to have a different perspective, and it doesn't cause the kind of stress that your normal psychobabble does. I don't mean psychobabble, that's putting it down, but the normal stories that we've told ourselves. So it is amazing to me how things get worked through without talking about content. Couples who were fighting, about whether he left the hair in the drain and wasn't considerate enough to pick it up. It starts to be less of a big deal. And so I've now incorporate the understanding of attention in any psychotherapy. And it's your choice if you like to use it, but it's helpful if you get an experience of it and then you can see what that's like.
Yeah, I mean, I've been practicing open focus meditation this week to prepare for this interview, doing guided sessions and things. And I did have that experience of this like deep meditative state, and things were coming up that I've not thought about for a long time. And there was, because I was in this like effortlessly non-judgmental state, it really didn't affect me in any kind of negative way. It was just like, oh yeah, there we go, there's that. Oh, I haven't thought about that for a while. Yeah. Really interesting.
Did you try any of the dissolving pain where we then have you merge with your uncomfortable feelings? For me, it's always anxiety.
Yeah, I did actually, because I've talked about it a little bit on this channel, but I have chronic pain in my right leg. So again, I did that. There's an open focus trainer. I used his Dr. Thomas Kopek. I don't know.
Sure.
No, yeah, really wonderful. Got a lovely voice, and I did that. It was really good. Yeah. So I've really I've done it before. I did it when I first read the book a couple of years ago, and then I've done it a lot at the end of coherent breathing practices with Dr. Richard Brown. I'm sure you're aware of their work as well.
We know Richard and Pat, his wife. Yes.
But yeah, I think maybe because I was deeper into it and maybe focusing more and more on it this week. Yeah, I had some quite profound experiences of that deep state, and there was almost like a blissfulness to the state, but also like a nostalgia, like almost like maybe this is how I felt when I was going off to sleep as a kid. I can vaguely remember like feeling like this. I don't know if that's just a personal thing, but yeah.
You don't know. I mean, you had an easy time of it, but and a lot of people do. They instantly have the experience you have. For me, it was very hard in the beginning. I couldn't sit still. I wanted to race my mind and understand everything, and that gets you nothing with open focus. So I had to do a little bit at a time, and it was first that I noticed that my behavior was different. I didn't really notice a different feeling, but say to me, "You're relaxed today," or "You're in a good mood today," and I hadn't realized that my physiology had changed. And so I'm always sympathetic to people who have a hard time, because that was, I was in it for the wrong reasons.
Okay.
Woo a man is not that right.
Yeah, okay. So would you recommend if people are having those kind of mind racing, trying to do it, but they're too distracted, is there anything you recommend for that? Any tips you have now?
Yeah, that we think of thoughts as another sense. We are not asking you to quiet your mind and not have thoughts. We're asking you to relate to those thoughts in an open focus way. What we tend to do, because we think we are our thoughts, is we have a thought and we follow it around and follow it around, and we're in this narrow focus on our thoughts. Well, what if you opened up to space and the thoughts can still be there, just as the sounds are still there, just as the body, the feelings are still there. So, and you can have thoughts even when you're producing alpha synchrony on the equipment. I used to have a New York office, and one of my clients was a playwright. And when he gets stuck in his writing, he would come and write on the machine. And he said that if he thought about his play in open focus, he could get unstuck. So here he was thinking. Sorry for the distraction. For those of you who are hearing it, notice how you narrow focus on that. That's an orienting reflex. It's totally normal, but you don't have to stay stuck there. You can orient, recognize it's a phone, and then go back into space.
Mm. So you mentioned there that the playwright jumped on the machine. Do people need an EEG machine to get into this state?
Now, most people never see an EEG machine, but they find the same properties occur when they're practicing, and it's various ways, but we have recordings of exercises. Most people learn in the beginning by doing what you did, listening to the guided recordings. But once you get it, you can do it in an instant. Like I was very narrow focused thinking about the phone there and then trying to explain to you, and I forgot about space. So I felt a little heightened anxiety, so I immediately went into space.
Yeah. I mean, there's a quote in the book, the Open Focus Brain book. The information flow has become a torrent. So this is when Dr. Fehmi's talking about, how addicted we are to narrow focus and how that's affecting everyone negatively in terms of their health. And that was in 2008 that he wrote that. The information flow has become a torrent. And I just think, since then with social media and stuff, it's even more narrow, even more focused, like even more tiny pieces of sequential information that we're literally like narrowing our bodies and our eyes, and like and that has to be like training us to be even more narrow in our focus if people are spending an hour or 2 hours a day doing that. So yeah, I feel like this has only got more relevant in like the last 12 years.
But Les has always thought that maybe the reason we're addicted to narrow focus is when we're first born, our job is to figure out what's us and what's not us. So there's a lot of discrimination. This is my thumb, that's mommy's breast, that we're trying to figure it out. So the early stages of development probably require a lot of narrow focus. And then we get rewarded. You shake a rattle at a baby in a crib and the baby looks and everybody gets excited. Or your teacher says, Tom, are you paying attention to me? And what we mean is we want you to lock on to us. So but it may start as a natural development, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need narrow focus. We just don't want to overuse it. We want to have flexibility of brainwaves so we can move in and out of states.
Yeah, and that word that gets used in the book a lot is the ability to have sort of flexible attention. And I think for a lot of the people who watch this channel, there's a lot of yogis out there watching these videos, and I think that's so interesting because in yoga we're so focused on getting more flexible in our body, but this is about that flexibility across different styles of attention, and that actually aids every element of your life to have that kind of control.
Yes.
And also the other word that I loved was union. So there's a chapter in the book on the similarity between that immersive state and love, because love is essentially this feeling of connection. And when we're immersed, there is no distinction. So I just love those things.
Yes. One of the titles that Les always wanted to write a book called Love is a Way of Paying Attention, because it is.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, you could get grandiose and say, would there be war? If everybody were an open book, not for you, how could there be war? How could I make war on you?
So with your new book that's coming out that you are a co-author on, The Open Focus Life.
Yes.
So it's Dr. Les Fehmi, you, Susan Shor Fehmi, and Mark Beauregard. What can we expect from this new book that's coming out in July?
Well, thank you for asking. The Open Focus Brain, which was the first book, and Dissolving Pain, which was the second, has a lot of information about where it came about and why, and some of this stuff I was talking about. We wanted to write something that was for everyday life. What do you do when you're online in the grocery store and you're on the express line and you promise to be home in half an hour, and the woman in front of you has more items than she's supposed to have, and the man in front of her can't find his checkbook, and you're fit to be tied? What do you do? And then we describe what you do in that situation. And that what we love about having Mark Beauregard on the writing of it, he writes a very engaging scenarios, like what do you do when you're having a party and you're nervous, or when you're online at the grocery store. So his stories are, I think, captivating, and because really the answer is always the same. Whatever the story is, it's the same thing. So that could get a little boring, but this makes it fun and readable.
So it's a very practical guide.
A little bit of science, but really soft pedaling the science part.
Nice. Okay, cool. And so if people want to know more about open focus and want to try some of these techniques, what should they do? Where can they go?
Well, openfocus.com is our website, and we have everything you might ever want, from information to downloads or CDs of exercises. And even if people want sessions with me over Zoom, that's available too, or coming to our offices. So openfocus.com should give them everything that they would like.
Okay, cool. And can people train to teach as well? Is there
Yes. Yeah, we call it a certification. We have certified teachers who we've trained, and we list on our website. They can find, if they're looking for somebody local, like Thomas Kopak. He's one of our certified people, and it involves doing some training with me over Zoom or in person.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susan, for joining me today. So I really hope you enjoyed hearing what Susan had to say. I will leave links down below to all those websites that she mentioned, books, etc., all down there, so check that out. If you want to know more about biofeedback, I've also interviewed Stephen Elliott, the original creator of the coherent breathing technique, who's, like Dr. Fehmi, also created his own biofeedback technology to measure things that no one else was looking at, so really interesting stuff. I've also interviewed Drs. Gerbag and Brown, who we mentioned in this video, and their interview with them is really good. Again, they led me in a practice, so check that out. If you want to do the practice that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I'm going to leave a link around here in a moment. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. It really helps the channel. Also consider subscribing if you're into meditation, breathwork and art. I've got loads of really cool videos coming up. I've got a whole series of experts in yoga nidra. I think we're going to have 3, possibly 4 experts in yoga nidra on the channel in the coming months. Also, I'm going to be interviewing breathwork legend Paul Hughes very soon, so hit subscribe if you want to see any of that stuff. Also, while you're here, do check out my book, Draw Breath, The Art of Breathing, which teaches you to meditate through drawing really simple diagrams and illustrations. It's a really fun book. It's getting some really good views on Amazon, so check that out. Again, I'll leave a link below. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video, and I really hope I see you again soon.